Welcome to the life of the Messiah through the Gospel of John. Now here's Rabbi Pastor LaRue.
Shalom, and welcome back to Life of the Messiah through the Gospel of John. This is week 6, course 6. And today we are going to be discussing miracles 4 and 5 in your outlines. And we are going to be starting with John 6, 1 through 14. And this is where Yeshua will feed the multitudes. Now here in John 6, 1 through 14, Yeshua will perform his fourth miracle, which will also be found in Matthew, that is Matthew 14, 13 through 21, Mark 6, 13 to 44, Luke 9, 10 through 17, and Yohanan John 1 through 15. Now, this is also the only miracle in which all four Gospels tell of Yeshua feeding the 5,000, which means this particular miracle is important and will point to something about the Messianic prophecy and the Messiah. We will not include all readings of the accounts here, but we will use John's account only as we begin now with John 6, 1 through 14. Verse 1. After these things, Yeshua went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, or Tiberias. Verse 2. A large crowd was following him because they were watching the signs which he was performing on those who were sick. Verse 3. But Yeshua went up on the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples, his Talmudim. Verse 4. Now the Pesach, or that is the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was near. Verse 5. So Yeshua, after raising his eyes and seeing that a large crowd was coming to him, said to Philip, Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat? Verse 6. But he was saying this only to test him, for he himself knew what he intended to do. Verse 7. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not enough for them, for each to receive just a little. Verse 8. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, verse 9, There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are these for so many people? Verse 10. Yeshua said, Have the people recline to eat. Now there was plenty of grass in the place. So the men reclined about 5,000 in number. Verse 11. Yeshua then took the loaves, and after giving thanks, he distributed them to those who were reclining. Likewise also of the fish, as much as they wanted. Verse 12. And when they had eaten their fill, he said to his disciples, Gather up the leftover pieces, so nothing will be lost. Verse 13. So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with pieces from the 5 barley loaves which were left over by those who had eaten. Verse 14. Therefore, when the people saw the sign which he had performed, they said, This is truly the prophet who is to come into the world. Okay, so here at the end of Yohanan, or that is John, chapter 5 here, Yeshua had just got done explaining that the Hebrew Scriptures, or the Old Testament, spoke, testified, and pointed people to who Yeshua was. But he was rejected. So now he will remove himself from them and go to the other side of the Galilee, which John calls that's the Tiberias. And we have a handout here for you, and it is a map on Tiberias, and I'd encourage you to check that out so you can see actually where Yeshua was in his life during his ministry at this point. Now, when he reaches Tiberias in verse 2 here of John 6, people begin to take notice that Yeshua here is healing a number of people, which starts a chain reaction, causing a large crowd to instantly follow him. And here we see that it's just the curiosity of people to follow great signs than to have recognized the importance of who the person is. Now in verse 3, John tells us that as the large crowd was following him, Yeshua decides to head up towards a mountain area for a short break with his Talmudim. In verse 4, we hear from John that the time of the Pesach, or the Passover, was drawing near. And this is John's way of telling us that the healings and miracle of feeding the 5,000 was during the late March or the early April period, as Passover is known and has always come during that time. Now in verses 5 and 6, we're told that Yeshua raised his eyes because he saw that the crowd was coming his way. Now in your outlines, we are at Hebrew vocabulary. Now here John tells us that Yeshua raised his eyes when he saw the crowd of people were coming. Now the Hebrew word for raise the eyes is the word muram, okay, which means to lift up or to raise up. In other words, Yeshua had rolled his eyes upward. And the reason he did this was that he had just sailed to Galilee from a place that he had already been using the power of God to cast out demons in a place called Garda. And as soon as he reached Capernaum, the people saw him start to perform signs and healing the sick. After all of this, Yeshua then heads to the mountain area nearby to take a rest with his Talmudim, with his disciples here. But of course, he's not there very long, because here comes the crowd of people all seeking him for what? Well, they're all looking to get well, to be made well, healed. So Jesus at this point was tired, but this didn't stop the people from pursuing him, in which he now rolls his eyes as an expression of realizing that he's shown no consideration for his fatigue here. All the people want from him is for him to do what? Well, to heal them. Never mind if he's tired. Never mind that he's only doing his works to validate to people that he is God's chosen Messiah. He's not just there to make miracles or healings. He's there to show them that he is the Messiah. He's there to show people. Now, even though Yeshua's fatigue was disregarded by the people here, he puts his fatigue aside and asks Philip where they can buy bread for the crowd, knowing that they were probably hungry from being there quite some time. And to take another opportunity to show the people that he was not only God's Messiah, but he was the only one prophet which Moses proclaimed would come. As in the Hebrew scriptures, God fed the people the manna to keep them alive, as seen from the Torah and Shemot. We find this in Exodus 16:1 through 20, that relates a story where God fed his people the manna. We will also see Yeshua like God, as he too will feed and will provide for his people's needs. As we see this in verse 6, it says that by asking Philip about where to buy bread was only a test, because Yeshua's plan and intention was not to just feed the people here, but was to reveal himself to be the same as God by feeding his people, and also showing himself to be the fulfillment of that prophet like Moses. Now in verses 7 through 9, Philip doesn't quite get nor realizes just yet what Yeshua's game plan is here. But he tells Yeshua that they only have 200 denarii, and for sure that's not even enough to feed anyone. The amount of denarii was 7 months' wages in Yeshua's time. For today's wages, it is something like around $40,000. And again, according to Philip, that wasn't even enough to feed all the people here. Then Andrew jumps into the conversation and tells them that there's a boy there with 5 barley loaves and 2 fishes. But how is everyone going to be fed? Again, they not realizing here that Yeshua's plan is to perform a great miracle to demonstrate his deity and being the fulfillment of Moses' prophecy here. Now, going into verses 10 and 13, Yeshua gives instruction for the people to recline and says, seat them in a grassy area. Now, after everyone is comfortable, Yeshua then gave the customary Jewish blessing of bread called the Hamatzi, which goes like this. It goes, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotze lechem mim haaretz. Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who provides the bread of the earth. Now, this was a typical Jewish prayer, generally said over meals, still on to this day. Now, after Yeshua had said the blessing, which is called the Berecha in Hebrew, he passed out the bread and fishes to the people as much as they wanted, which also shows us something about God here. And that is that when God provides, he makes sure that we all have what we need. Not less, not barely enough, but all that we need. And as everyone was sufficiently fed, Yeshua has the disciples take the leftovers now. Going into verse 13, we're told that there were how many baskets? Well, there were 12 baskets full of leftovers. And the mention of this 12 baskets is a testimony which points to the whole community as it was provided by God through Yeshua. Now, in the Old Testament or in the Hebrew Scriptures, all 12 tribes of Israel were fed with what? Well, they were fed with the manna or the manna here in the wilderness by God. Now, no doubt Yohanan or John is showing us here that the same source of Israel's provision comes from God, but now it will come through Yeshua, God's Son, and the Messiah. Now, all that God's people need is found in and through, once again, Yeshua, which in verse 14, we're told that after the people had seen the great sign Yeshua had performed, they looked at him as being what? The fulfillment of the one who would come and be like the prophet Moses. Now, we have a great handout here for you. Really encourage you to read this one. It's called Moses, a Type of Christ. And there you will compare Moses' life to Yeshua's life and see indeed he is that prophet Moses spoke of. Okay, now we come to reasons for this miracle here. What is the reason that Yeshua needed to make this miracle here? Well, let's find out, starting with point 1 in your outline. Number 1 was to validate his messiahship, to prove he's the Messiah of Israel. Going on to point number 2, was to fulfill the Mosaic prophecy. He was there to show the people he was fulfilling God's word. He is that prophet that Moses spoke of. And then number 3, to show deity, to show that he is the same as God. The same as God provided for his people in the wilderness is the same as Yeshua will now provide for all of his people right there and then. The people were to realize Yeshua was God in the flesh. Okay, now, in your outline, we now come to miracle number 5, and this is going to be where Yeshua will walk on water. We're going to find this in Yohanan, that's John 6:15 through 21. Now, this is the 5th miracle, okay? This is the 5th miracle or sign performed by the Messiah, and it is found directly after John 6:1 through 14 here. And here, Yohanan or John's going to show us that Yeshua was more than just a normal human being. And once more, validating Yeshua's deity and kingship. Now, let's go to John 6:15 through 21, and this is what it says in your outlines. Verse 15, so, Yeshua, aware that they intended to come and take him by force to make him king, withdrew again to the mountain by himself, alone. Verse 16. Now when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, verse 17, and after getting into a boat, they started to cross the sea to Capernaum. It had already become dark, and Yeshua had not yet come to them. Verse 18. In addition, the sea began getting rough because a strong wind was blowing. Verse 19. Then, when they had rowed about 25 or 30 stadia, they saw Yeshua walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were frightened. Verse 20. But he said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." Verse 21. So they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going here. Now, after Yeshua had performed the miracles of feeding the 5,000 and healed the sick at Capernaum, the people were completely convinced that Yeshua was not only the fulfillment of this Messianic prophecy made by Moses, as seen in the Torah, mentioned in Devarim, the prophet Moses spoke in chapter 18, 15 through 18, that one would be sent like Moses, but that he definitely was their Messiah and king. So the people recognized that he was not only this prophet like Moses, but hey, let's make him the king. He's not just the prophet, but he's actually our king here. And so what did the people decide to do? Well, they decided that they should take hold of Yeshua and do what? Well, force him into kingship, as verse 15 said, that they intended to force him to become what? King. But Yeshua, knowing all of this and seeing it coming and seeing them coming his way, he departs from them up to the mountain nearby. Now, there's a question here for us as to why didn't Yeshua just allow the people to do what they wanted to do with him here? They had already believed who he was, but Yeshua would not allow himself, okay? He didn't allow them to force him into what? Into premature kingship. So what we understand here is that Yeshua departed from the people to stop a premature coronation. And we also see here that Messiah's coming was not for an immediate kingship, but was for the purpose of Messiahship and salvation first. And God's first purpose here and plan for the Messiah is to become the nation's Savior and salvation. That's what the first coming of the Messiah was all about. The second purpose and plan of God for the Messiah in the nation will be a future one where he will become ruler over it. He will be deity, priest, and king here. Now this will all happen when? Well, this will all take place after the second return of the Messiah. So God's game plan is to make him king, priest, and show he is God, God, man, and God. Now in verses 16 through 18, it had reached nightfall, and the disciples had decided to cross the sea to get to where? Well, that's Capernaum. But they had left without Yeshua, perhaps to meet him when they got there. But along the way in verses 18 and 19, it says that a strong wind was blowing as they were somewhat around about 3 to 4 miles out on sea. When all of a sudden, they had seen Yeshua walking on the water, headed straight towards them, and their minds were blown. Because how in the world did Yeshua instantly leave the mountain and appear suddenly on the sea water? But John is now going to point out a few things about who Yeshua is here. But a great illustration on the deliverance of God here is to know that when Yeshua sees us helpless or sees us in our struggles, he also knows when to act. He knows when to intervene on his people's behalf, the same as he did here with his disciples in this situation. He saw them helpless, and he saw them fighting with strong winds, and he saw that they were in trouble, and they needed his help and intervention. Now going on to verse 20 here, the first thing Yeshua does is identifies himself to his disciples. And in the Greek reading of Yeshua's statement here, it doesn't say it is I. But the Greek translated as saying, I am he. Do not be afraid. And here we see the great I am in action, delivering his people out of the waters here. Now going into your outline, we are at Hebrew vocabulary. And here we have the word for afraid. What is the word afraid in Hebrew? Well, the word we have in Hebrew here is the word yareh. Can you say that? Yareh, yes. And it means to be afraid here. It means to be awestruck. It means to be in fear or to be terrified or to fall into dread. Okay, so what we learn here, what we're going to learn here is that when the disciples saw Yeshua walking on the water towards them, they were pretty much in a state of awestruck and in shock all at the same time. They were most likely frozen and startled by what they had just witnessed. Now, John retells this event to show us a few things which sets Yeshua apart from a normal human. First, he tells us that, number one, in your outline, Yeshua is deity. That means he's the same as God, having power and authority over what? Well, over all creation, the same as God. Point number two in your outline, he points out that Jesus, Yeshua, is the Memra, or the Word of God, which was with God in the beginning, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters, as seen from where? Well, in the Torah, in the Bereshit, Genesis 1:1. And Yeshua, Jesus, is that same Spirit in person who now was walking over the face of the waters in front of his disciples. Finally, John now ends this great revelation in verse 21 by telling us that as soon as the disciples were calm, they let him into the boat, and immediately they had reached the land where they were set to go. And a great learning lesson here for all of us is to know that as soon as we are willing to trust, as soon as we're willing to trust him, and we let him into our situation or into our lives or into our struggles, Yeshua will deliver us, and we see to it that we will get into the direction he is calling us to go. Now, what is the reason here for this particular miracle? Well, we only have one, and that is number one in your outline. And then this reason here is to show the deity, the power and authority of the Messiah, to show that Yeshua is man's deliverer who intervenes when trust and faith is placed where? Placed in the Messiah. And that is our week 6, course 6 lesson for today. Be sure and join us for week 7, course 7. I'm Pastor Rabbi LaRue, and you've been watching Life of the Messiah through the Gospel of John.
Be sure and join Pastor Rabbi LaRue for week 7, course 7. Shalom.